My name is Claire Whitaker. I'm 32 years old, and the first person who lied to me on my wedding day was my mother. She texted me at 3:11 p.m., 14 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, and wrote, "Traffic is ridiculous, sweetheart, but we're almost there." The message would have sounded loving to anyone else. To me, it sounded rehearsed. I was standing in the bridal suite of a restored greenhouse in Asheville, North Carolina, staring at my reflection in a dress I had paid for myself, in a room filled with women who loved me enough to show up early, steam veils, fix bobby pins, and keep smiling whenever they caught me checking the door. I had spent 18 months designing museum exhibits for other people's memories, and somehow I still believed my own parents might finally help me create one worth keeping. I should have known better. My bouquet was already in my hands. The music cue had been delayed once. My fiancé was waiting under a ceiling of hanging lights and climbing jasmine, and I kept hearing that stupid text in my head. Almost there. That phrase had followed me my entire life. Almost proud of you. Almost enough. Almost chosen. My throat tightened when the venue coordinator knocked softly and asked whether we should hold the ceremony another 5 minutes. I smiled the way daughters do when they're trying not to embarrass themselves in public and said yes. Of course. Let's wait. That was the moment I realized something I should have accepted years earlier. If the happiest day of my life still depended on whether my parents bothered to arrive, then maybe I had never truly been free of them at all. Before I tell you what I found out next, and what I did after I stopped waiting, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. I wasn't nervous about marrying Owen. I was nervous about stepping into the same old family script in a prettier dress. You know the kind of script I mean. The one where nobody says out loud who matters more, because they've been showing you for so many years they no longer need words. In my family, my sister Lauren had always been the event, and I had always been the support staff standing just outside the frame. 2 years earlier, my parents had thrown her a wedding outside Charleston that looked like something lifted from a luxury magazine spread. White peonies everywhere, imported linens, a string quartet at sunset, a custom dance floor monogram. I know exactly how much they spent because I once saw the breakdown on my father's desk while helping him sort receipts after his surgery. $160,000, not including the rehearsal dinner. My mother gave Lauren a 20-minute toast that night. 20 full minutes. She cried, laughed, told stories from Lauren's childhood, described her as radiant, elegant, gifted, impossible not to love. My father stood with a champagne glass in his hand, grinning at the crowd like he had personally launched a dynasty. At one point he actually said, "Some daughters just know how to make a family proud." The room laughed softly, warmly, approvingly. I remember standing near the catering station with a polite smile frozen onto my face, while a server asked if I was part of the planning team. That was almost funny. Almost. Because in a way, I always had been. I was the one who picked up forgotten favors, drove back for the extra garment bags, kept our aunt from complaining about her table, and stayed late to help load gifts into cars. That was the shape of my role. Useful, dependable, easy to overlook. So when Owen and I got engaged, I made a promise to myself. I would not beg for enthusiasm. I would not build my wedding around the fantasy that my parents might suddenly become different people under flattering lighting. We chose a restored greenhouse in Asheville because it felt alive and warm and intimate. We kept the guest list small enough that every person there would actually matter. I paid for my own dress. Owen and I split the venue, catering, and flowers. I handpicked every detail, right down to the cream silk ribbon wrapped around my bouquet and the pressed botanical menus at each plate. My parents' only concrete contribution was a vague sentence my mother repeated whenever anyone asked if she was helping. Oh, we're just letting Claire do her little style. Her little style. That was how she referred to the most important day of my life. Meanwhile, she still reposted old clips from Lauren's wedding every anniversary with captions like, "Still the gold standard" and "Some days can never be topped." She sent me messages that sounded helpful if you didn't know her tone. Are you sure a greenhouse won't feel too casual? Are you sure people still do seated dinners for smaller weddings? Are you sure your dress photographs well without cathedral lighting? Every question carried the same quiet knife. Lauren did it better. And the worst part was that I had trained myself to absorb those cuts like weather. Smile, redirect, move on, be the easy one, be the reasonable one, be the daughter who never needs too much. But there's only so long you can survive on emotional scraps before you start noticing the pattern for what it is. Have you ever looked back on your family history and realized you weren't imagining the imbalance at all? That you weren't too sensitive, too dramatic, too needy? You were just the only one expected to live on less. The first confirmation came from the valet, but the truth had already started forming in my body before he said a word. The coordinator came back to the bridal suite with a careful expression, the kind people wear when they're trying to figure out whether bad news should be whispered or handed over all at once. Behind her stood a boy from valet parking, maybe 19, shoulders stiff, key tags looped around 2 fingers. He looked like he wished he were anywhere else. I stepped forward before anybody could protect me from whatever he was about to say. I asked him directly, "Did you see my parents arrive?" He nodded once, fast, then glanced at the coordinator as if asking permission to continue. I told him it was okay. He swallowed and said yes. They had pulled up about 40 minutes earlier. Relief hit me for half a second, thin and stupid and automatic. Then he kept talking. He said they stayed in the car for a few minutes, asked whether this was the only entrance, and then asked for directions to Lake Julian because they were running late for a cookout. I genuinely thought I had misheard him, not because the sentence was unclear, but because my brain refused to fit those words into the shape of my wedding day. I repeated the phrase back to him. "Late for a cookout?" He nodded again, more reluctantly this time, and added that the woman in the passenger seat had laughed and said, "Claire will still be doing pictures. We can stop in after." There are moments in life when pain doesn't arrive as a wave, it arrives as precision. Every blurred doubt suddenly snaps into focus. That was what happened to me. They hadn't gotten lost. They hadn't been delayed by an accident. They hadn't been stranded in traffic with no way to reach me. They had driven all the way to my wedding venue, sat outside while I waited in a white dress, looked at the entrance, and made a choice. Then they left. For a barbecue. A backyard one, apparently, at my cousin Tessa's house. Folding chairs, paper plates, coolers of soda, somebody manning a grill. And what made it so unforgivable wasn't even that they chose another family event. It was that they chose something so casual, so ordinary, so absurdly skippable. If they had left for a medical emergency, I would have panicked. If they had left because someone was hurt, I would have understood. But a barbecue? There is no way to soften what that means. It means my ceremony ranked below side dishes and small talk. It means the first hour of my marriage was considered negotiable. It means they believed they could swing by later and still call themselves supportive parents. The coordinator gently asked if I wanted to delay again. I could hear movement outside the room, guests shifting in their seats, musicians waiting, my life trying to continue while I stood there in a silence so sharp it felt metallic. Then my phone buzzed. A new message from my mother. "Traffic is awful. Don't make a big deal if we miss the beginning, sweetheart. We'll come by after." Sweetheart. I stared at the word until it stopped resembling affection and started looking like strategy. Don't make a big deal. That was always the command hidden inside every injury they handed me. Don't make a big deal when Lauren gets the bigger room. Don't make a big deal when your birthday dinner gets postponed. Don't make a big deal when your promotion gets ignored because Lauren's dog is sick. Don't make a big deal when your own wedding gets treated like a stop on the way to somewhere else. The valet was still standing there, mortified. I thanked him because none of this was his fault, and watched him leave like he couldn't escape fast enough. Then I looked at the closed door, the bouquet in my hand, the clock on the wall, and understood something I should have accepted years ago. This wasn't a surprise. It was a final confirmation. They hadn't ruined my wedding yet. They had exposed the exact value they placed on it. And once something is exposed that clearly, you can't go back to calling it confusion. I walked into the side prep room and shut the door behind me before anyone could say something kind enough to make me cry. The silence in there felt strange after the hum of the bridal suite, like the air itself was waiting to see what I would do. I set my bouquet down on a console table and looked at my phone again. Not because I needed more proof, but because betrayal has a sick way of making you verify what you already know. I opened Instagram first, then the family group chat I kept muted for my own sanity. There they were, not in traffic, not apologizing, not rushing in my direction. My cousin Tessa had already uploaded a carousel titled "Family Kickoff at the Lake." In the second photo, my father was standing at the grill in the tan apron I bought him 3 Christmases ago, smiling like he had nowhere more important to be. In another, my mother had one hand around a plastic cup and the other around Lauren's arm. The caption read, "Finally, everybody together again." I was 38 minutes away in a wedding gown, and according to the internet, everybody was together. Just not me. That detail landed deeper than I expected, because it wasn't only that they had left, it was that, in their minds, my absence did not interrupt the picture of family. I was not central enough to be missing. Naomi found me standing there with my phone in one hand and my chest so tight I thought I might actually tear the zipper in my dress trying to breathe. She closed the door behind her and didn't waste time on the usual questions. She took one look at my face and said, "Tell me." So I did. Not elegantly, not in some composed, cinematic monologue. I told her in fragments. Parking lot, cookout. We can stop in after. Don't make a big deal. Her expression changed by the second, from concern to disbelief to something much more useful than pity. Anger. Clean, unconfused anger on my behalf. She took the phone from my hand, looked through the pictures, and said, "Claire, if they walk in here later expecting seats and smiles, I swear I will have them turned around so fast they'll think they're back in the parking lot." I should have been horrified. Instead, I laughed once, harshly, because her outrage made something in me feel seen. That was what had been missing for years. Everyone in my family had always rushed to explain my parents to me. They mean well. They're old-fashioned. Lauren just needs more support. You know how your mother gets. You're the strong one. But nobody had ever looked at the facts and said the obvious thing out loud. This is cruel. Standing there in that room, I started remembering all the smaller moments that had built this one. The college scholarship I won that earned a distracted congratulations because Lauren was going through a breakup. The birthday dinner my parents rescheduled twice, then combined with a Father's Day lunch to save time. The promotion I got at the museum that my mother waved off by asking whether Owen was still sure he wanted a wife with such a demanding job. The Christmas morning when Lauren got a surprise trip to Napa and I got a leather planner because, as my father put it, "You've always been so practical, reliable, mature, easy." Those weren't compliments in my family. They were cost-saving measures, labels they used whenever they wanted me to swallow disappointment without making them uncomfortable. Naomi crouched in front of me, one hand gripping the edge of my chair, and said something I don't think I'll ever forget. She said, "Claire, this is not the day they abandoned you. They've been doing that slowly for years. This is just the first day you can't pretend otherwise because you're wearing white, and everyone can see the damage. That sentence hit harder than the photos. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because deep down I had spent so much of my life hoping context would redeem them. Maybe I thought if I achieved enough, loved enough, succeeded enough, planned carefully enough, they would eventually rise to meet the occasion. But some people do not rise. They simply reveal. I sat there for another moment, smoothing the fabric over my knees, staring at the faint shimmer of lace against my skin, and I stopped asking how they could do this. That question had kept me trapped for years. It implied there must be an answer that would make the hurt reasonable. There wasn't. The better question was what I was going to do with the truth, now that it had finally stopped hiding. Naomi reached into her purse, pulled out my lipstick, and handed it to me like she was handing me back my own name. So I touched up my mouth. I picked up my bouquet. I looked in the mirror and saw the same dress, same face, same wedding day, but not the same woman who had walked into that room hoping for a last-minute miracle. I texted the coordinator, "Start on time, no more delays." Then I sent a second message. "If Richard and Carol Whitaker arrive, do not bring them to the family table. Bring them to me first, quietly." That was the moment grief stopped driving and something steadier took the wheel. Once I made the decision, my body followed it a second later, like some invisible wire inside me had finally stopped sparking and settled into place. The shaking in my hands eased, my breathing slowed. Even the noise outside the prep room, chairs shifting, shoes crossing tile, muted voices from guests taking their seats, stopped sounding like pressure and started sounding like reality waiting for me to step into it. Pain was still there, of course. It hadn't vanished. But it was no longer in charge. That was new. I picked up my bouquet again, rolled my shoulders back, and looked at myself one last time in the mirror. My mascara was intact. My lipstick was steady. My eyes were different. Not softer, not sadder. Clearer. That was the word. Clearer. For most of my life, I had mistaken hope for loyalty. I had believed that if I stayed patient enough, useful enough, understanding enough, my parents would eventually meet me halfway and act like I mattered without being reminded. But standing there in a wedding dress with the truth laid out so plainly, I could finally see how badly that hope had trained me to betray myself. Naomi opened the door for me without saying a word, and together we walked back toward the ceremony entrance. The quartet had restarted. Guests were rising slightly in their seats, trying not to look too curious, trying and failing. A delayed ceremony always creates whispers. A bride walking without her parents creates silence. When the doors opened and I stepped through alone, the whole room shifted. Not with pity, the way I had feared, with attention. Real, full attention. It moved through the space like a current. I could feel it in the stillness, in the way conversations died instantly, in the way people turned fully toward me instead of glancing politely and then looking away. For one suspended second, I understood exactly how exposed I was, and then, unexpectedly, that exposure stopped feeling like humiliation and started feeling like power. I was still here. They weren't. Let everybody see that. Let everybody wonder. Let everybody remember who actually showed up and who didn't. The aisle stretched in front of me under warm hanging lights and climbing jasmine, and I walked it alone with my spine straight and my head high. Halfway down, I saw Naomi in the front row, already crying. I saw Owen's mother with both hands pressed against her chest. I saw one of my colleagues from the museum looking at me with the kind of fierce pride usually reserved for survivors and marathon finishers. Then I saw Owen. His face changed the second he realized I was coming by myself. First concern, then understanding. Then something steadier and deeper than either one. respect. He didn't look embarrassed for me. He didn't look panicked. He looked like he knew this walk was costing me something and admired me for taking it anyway. By the time I reached him, my throat was burning. He took both my hands and leaned in just enough to whisper, "They don't get to touch this moment. Do you hear me? They don't get to have it." That nearly undid me more than anything else all day. Because that was what I had been protecting without even realizing it. Not just the ceremony, the meaning of it. The right to have one sacred thing in my life that didn't have to bend around my family's selfishness. The officiant began, and I focused on the cadence of her voice, on the warmth of Owen's hands around mine, on the light filtering through the greenhouse glass. Little by little, the room stopped feeling like a place where I had been abandoned and started feeling like a place where I had been witnessed. That difference mattered more than I can explain. During the vows, I heard my own voice come out stronger than I expected. We had written them weeks before, simple and sincere, but when it was my turn, I added one line that had not been in the original version. I said, "I promise to build a home where nobody has to earn tenderness by being convenient." The words hung there for a second, and I felt it ripple through the room. A few people understood immediately. I could tell. Maybe others just heard it as poetic. That was fine. Owen understood. His eyes filled before he spoke a single word of his own vows. When he promised that I would never have to stand alone in a room full of people again, I felt something inside me loosen that had been tight for years. Not heal, not fully, but loosen. Enough to breathe. Enough to believe that my future did not have to resemble my history. When we kissed, the applause that followed wasn't the polite kind people give at formal events because it's expected. It had force behind it. Joy, yes, but also solidarity, the kind of applause that says we saw what happened, and we see you anyway. We walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife, and with every step I felt myself moving further away from the daughter my parents had trained me to be. Cocktail hour began under strings of lights, and the low gold glow of late afternoon pouring through the greenhouse panels. Guests clustered around linen-draped tables, servers passed trays of champagne and crab cakes, and the band eased into something soft and bright. More than one person hugged me a little tighter than usual. No one asked invasive questions. No one forced sympathy on me. That restraint felt like its own form of kindness. They gave me room to remain dignified, and I will always remember that. Then, as the photographer came over to ask about formal portraits, I made a decision that felt small in the moment and enormous the second I spoke it aloud. He asked if I wanted to wait a little longer in case my parents arrived before family photos. I said no. Then I clarified. I said, "Let's do the family portrait now. Just not by blood." He blinked once, then nodded like a professional who had seen enough weddings to understand that some instructions carry history. So we gathered the people who had actually chosen us: Naomi, Owen's parents, my college roommate, my museum team, the neighbor who once helped me move out of an apartment at midnight, the mentor who taught me how to negotiate my salary, friends who had flown across states, people who called, checked in, showed up, stayed late, remembered details, made space. People who had never once treated love like a ranking system. We stood beneath a wall of ivy and lantern light while the photographer arranged us closer, tighter, warmer, until it stopped looking like a substitute for family and started looking like the real thing. It was the most honest photo I had ever taken. I looked at it on the camera preview and felt a strange rush of peace. There it is, I thought. There's the life I actually belong to. And then I did something my old self never would have dared. I posted it before dinner. No overthinking, no draft folder, no asking if it was too much. Just the photo and a caption. "Thank you to the people who chose to be here today. You made this wedding unforgettable. Some seats were left empty, but love has a way of filling what disrespect abandons. I didn't tag my parents. I didn't name anyone. I didn't need to. Anyone who needed to understand would understand immediately. Anyone who felt exposed by it had earned that feeling. I slipped my phone back into Naomi's clutch, accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray, and turned toward the reception with Owen beside me. For the first time all day, I was no longer bracing for disappointment. I was ready for the rest of my wedding to begin. The fallout started before dinner. Tessa, my cousin with the barbecue and the dramatic captions, commented first. Wait, were Aunt Carol and Uncle Rick not there? Then Lauren texted me privately. Why are you posting passive-aggressive stuff on your wedding day? Mom is upset. I stared at that message for a full 3 seconds before laughing so hard Owen had to ask if I was all right. There is something almost artistic about the entitlement of people who injure you and then immediately claim your reaction is the offense. I typed back. They chose your cousin's grill over my ceremony after coming all the way to the venue parking lot. There is nothing passive in what I'm saying. Then I muted her and went to dinner. The reception was beautiful. Not perfect. Beautiful. Perfect is brittle. Beautiful is alive. Owen's mother gave a short toast so sincere it made half the room cry. Naomi somehow turned my solo walk down the aisle into a story about courage instead of abandonment. My guests danced. They laughed. They ate mushroom risotto and short ribs and tiny lemon tarts under hanging ferns and candlelight. At one point, I stepped outside to breathe and saw the mountain ridgeline fading into evening blue. And I remember thinking that heartbreak is strange because it can stand beside joy without canceling it. I was wounded and happy at the same time. I think adulthood is learning that both things can be true. Then, just after our first dance, the coordinator approached me with the careful face again. This time I didn't tense. I just knew. She said, "Your parents are here now." So late it was almost funny. They had apparently decided to come by after the barbecue, exactly as my mother had planned, as if my wedding were a drop-in obligation they could squeeze between burgers and dessert. The coordinator added that they seemed upset about the seating change. Of course they were upset. People like that don't mind disrespecting you. They mind when disrespect has logistics. I asked where they were. She said they were in the side entrance near the kitchen, demanding to know why nobody had shown them to the family table. I handed Owen my champagne flute, lifted the hem of my dress, and walked back there myself. My father was red-faced. My mother looked offended in a navy silk dress I had never seen because she hadn't been present for any of the photos, any of the vows, any of the part where a parent might matter. The first thing she said was, "Claire, what on earth is going on? Your aunt sent me your post and now people are calling." My father jumped in with, "You embarrassed us on my wedding day." Imagine that. They had missed nearly everything and still found a way to center themselves. I looked at both of them and felt no panic, no pleading, no daughterly reflex to smooth the moment over. Just stillness. I said, "You skipped my ceremony for a barbecue. You sat in your car outside my venue and decided grilled chicken mattered more than seeing me get married. Then you told me not to make a big deal out of it. I made the exact amount of deal it deserved." My mother tried a smile, the condescending kind she uses when she thinks she can recover social control. She said, "Oh, sweetheart, don't be dramatic. We were going to come after." I nodded once and said, "That's exactly the problem. You thought after was good enough." My father looked toward the dining room and lowered his voice. "Are you really going to keep us out over one misunderstanding?" One misunderstanding? That phrase almost impressed me. Years of favoritism, neglect, comparison, and public humiliation, all gift-wrapped as confusion. I told them something I should have told them a decade earlier. This is not about tonight. Tonight is just the last receipt. My mother's eyes finally hardened when she realized shame wasn't going to move me. She said I was punishing them in front of the whole family. I said no, they had done that themselves, the moment they chose where to spend the afternoon. My father asked whether I was seriously going to make them leave. I told him yes, calmly, clearly, without raising my voice once. Then I added one more thing, and this was the part neither of them saw coming. 3 months before the wedding, my father had asked whether I could still look over the renovation budget for the lake house they wanted to turn into a short-term rental. I'm a museum exhibit designer, but I've spent years managing vendors, contracts, fabrication schedules, installation crews, and cost overruns. In my family, that translated to free labor whenever someone wanted something made efficient and beautiful. I had spent weeks helping them connect with a preservation grant consultant, map out a rentable floor plan, and prepare the proposal package that would make the whole project financially viable. The final application, with my vendor recommendations, timeline revisions, and tax credit notes, was due Monday morning. I looked at my father and said, "Since you think my milestones are optional, so is my labor. I withdrew from the project an hour ago. Check your email." He stared at me. My mother actually blanched. I had done it while changing into my reception shoes. One concise message to them, one to the consultant, one to the contractor. Effective immediately, I am no longer involved in the lake house project in any advisory or coordination capacity. Please remove my name from all materials and direct future questions elsewhere. That house was their big retirement plan, their next status symbol dream, the thing they had bragged about to every cousin and church friend within driving distance. They had been depending on me to hold the moving parts together because Lauren wasn't good with details, which in family language meant Lauren was too precious to be burdened, and Claire was too reliable to refuse. Until now. My father asked if I would really sabotage family over a private misunderstanding. I almost smiled at the repetition. Same word, smaller voice. I said, "No, I'm finally charging market rate for access to me, and you can't afford it." The coordinator stepped closer, not touching me, just present. Owen was a few feet behind, silent and solid. My mother switched tactics the way she always did when control failed. Tears. She said, "I can't believe you'd do this to us on your wedding day." That sentence told me everything. Even then, even there, the day still belonged to them in their minds. Their injury, their humiliation. Their daughter was merely the occasion. So I gave them the truth stripped of every softener I had ever been taught to use. I said, "You taught me my whole life that effort follows value. You spent money, time, speeches, weekends, and energy on Lauren because that's where your value went. Today, I finally believed you. And now my effort follows value too. It's going to my husband, my marriage, and the people who actually showed up. Not you. Not anymore." My father went quiet first. My mother looked like someone had slapped her, though I had barely lifted my voice above conversation level. It's amazing how brutal a boundary can sound to people who expected permanent access. I asked the coordinator to have someone bring them their coats from coat check. Then I turned around and walked back into my reception, before either of them could try one final rewrite of reality. Behind me, I heard my mother say my name the way she used to when I was little and still ran toward it. I didn't turn around. Have you ever reached a point where not looking back is the most loving thing you can do for yourself? I think some people call that coldness. I call it education. Because that's the lesson my wedding taught me more clearly than any book, sermon, or apology ever could. Love without respect is just access, and family without accountability is just habit wearing sentimental clothes. We are taught that being the bigger person is noble, that enduring hurt quietly proves character, that keeping peace is more important than telling the truth. But useful knowledge, the kind that actually protects your life, teaches something different. It teaches that self-respect is not cruelty, that boundaries are not betrayal, and that the people who miss your biggest moments are telling you exactly where you rank in their priorities. Believe them the first time. By the end of the night, my parents were gone, my guests were still dancing, and the family group chat had exploded into the kind of chaos that happens when one person finally refuses the old script. Tessa deleted her cookout post. Lauren called twice. An aunt I hadn't heard from in years sent a message that simply said, "I'm sorry we all let this happen for so long." Owen found me near the dance floor, slipped his hand around my waist, and asked if I was ready for cake. I looked around the room, at Naomi laughing with the band, at my chosen family crowding around the dessert table, at candlelight flickering against the greenhouse glass, at the life waiting for me beyond this one brutal, clarifying day, and I said yes. Not because everything was healed, not because I had stopped being hurt, but because for the first time, the story was no longer about whether my parents loved me correctly. It was about what I would do now that I understood they never had. And what I did next changed everything. I stopped volunteering to be overlooked. I stopped financing relationships that ran on my silence. I stopped confusing endurance with love. I went on my honeymoon. I blocked 3 numbers over the ocean. I came home lighter. Sometimes revenge doesn't look like screaming in public or exposing every family secret at once. Sometimes it looks like letting the right people watch you thrive, while the wrong people realize the door no longer opens from their side. On the night of my wedding, my parents skipped me for my cousin's barbecue. By the next morning, they had lost their project manager, their fallback daughter, their quiet fixer, and the woman they assumed would always be waiting. They never saw that coming.